forecast by the Prime Minister on the coronavirus pandemic.
From the Prime Minister now.
It is now almost 2 months since...
Across all channels last night, the Prime Minister outlined where he hoped COVID policy would go. That and the new slogans led to accusations of mixed and confusing messaging.
We must stay alert, control the virus, and save lives.
Today, in his first ever common statement on the COVID crisis, the Prime Minister said any confusion was inevitable.
When you're coming out of a message that is so gloriously simple as stay at home, there will inevitably be complexities.
Many more people than the government ever expected heeded the stay-home message and stopped working. Dropping the slogan is about getting them back to the workplace. The Labour leader suggested it had not been thought through properly.
What the country needs at this time is clarity and reassurance. And at the moment, both are in pretty short supply. And at the heart of the problem, it seems, is that the Prime Minister made a statement last night before the plan was written or at least finalised. And that has caused considerable confusion.
What we're saying now is that you should stay at home if you can, but go to work if you must, if your job doesn't allow you to go to work. And plainly, he raised properly the issue of people who don't have the right childcare, Mr. Speaker, and we will count on employers to be reasonable.
Government advice published in the last hour tells employers how to observe social distancing. The Prime Minister said there would be spot checks on workplaces. Trade unions should be consulted. But trade unions say that should have happened already if some workplaces are reopening on Wednesday. In its 50-page strategy document, the government advises, but does not instruct you, to wear face coverings on public transport and in confined spaces like smaller shops. It says future clampdowns, if the virus is spreading fast, could be local or regional, not national. The government's investigating whether 2 households might count as 1 household or a bubble, allowing some grandparents to see their grandchildren perhaps. Number 10 said the return to school for primary school children it hopes to start next month will not be compulsory. That an acknowledgement of the difficulty the government could have assuring parents that schools are safe when teachers' unions are extremely wary and Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland don't feel ready to open their schools or follow most of the other immediate relaxations announced by Boris Johnson.
So please be patient and please try not to get distracted by messages from other parts of the UK. All governments across the UK are trying to do the right thing.
She would rather this wasn't called the UK strategy paper, but it permits in England one-on-one meetings in the open air with someone not in your household, if socially distanced. You can now drive any distance to the countryside, say, or the seaside, but you can't overnight there, and you can't cross into Wales or Scotland. You can take unlimited exercise on your own. That rule change UK-wide. And in England, you can play singles tennis and golf. But as with other new advice, the detail took a while to firm up.
I've received a lot of phone calls from members and non-members asking what the story is. And according to the guidelines last night, it was playing golf singularly or with members of your household. And that made things pretty awkward, and it was unclear to a large extent exactly what we could and couldn't do.
This afternoon, the government confirmed you can play golf with someone from another household if you keep your distance. One of many clarifications the government had to make in the last 24 hours as slogans shifted and frustrations surfaced.
I mean, you literally couldn't write this. You couldn't write this. If this was in a farce on the telly, I'd go, that's a bit far-fetched.
I know.
No government would arse it up that much. I mean,
Doesn't make sense.
It is utterly astonishing. And we've been, you know that we've been really level on here. We've been really sensible, I think, on here.
Everybody understands what we are trying to do together. And that is working together as a country to obey the social distancing rules, which everybody understands. And I think what the British people understand, that this is the moment for the whole country to come together and to obey those rules and to apply their common sense in the application of those rules.
The Prime Minister insisted his plans were tentative. If the infection rate goes up, the direction of travel changes. Restrictions could be reimposed. Fines for breaches will be doubled to maintain discipline. This could, he warned, be a very long haul.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Well, just under 1/4% of the population in England tested positive for COVID-19 in the 2 weeks between April the 26th and May the 8th. That's according to estimates from the Office for National Statistics. That suggests that 136,000 people in England are currently infected with the virus, but many others will have had it in previous weeks. It is the initial result of a survey between the ONS and the University of Oxford that is trying to identify how widespread this disease has actually become. Now, when it comes to ending the lockdown, the kingdom is not united. There will be no such easing of restrictions in Scotland and Wales. Scotland's First Minister, as you heard, Nicola Sturgeon, said the message there was still very much stay at home, describing Boris Johnson's new message as vague and imprecise. Well, our Scotland correspondent, Kieran Jenkins, is in Glasgow. Kieran.
Nicola Sturgeon was at pains to point out today that in Scotland, nothing has really changed. The only easing in Scotland is that you can now exercise more than once a day. And in her press briefing earlier, she stood in front of what used to be the UK-wide slogan, stay at home. And the First Minister said she would not play Russian roulette with COVID-19. But in a public address tonight, she did say that some restrictions would be relaxed in Scotland if the infections continued to fall. But she also said again, pointedly, stay at home.
We are asking you to stick with lockdown for a bit longer so that we can consolidate our progress, not jeopardise it. Except for essential work that can't be done at home, going out for food and medicine, or for exercise, please continue to stay at home.
Now, Nicola Sturgeon says she feels the actions being taken in England would be premature for Scotland based on the spread of the virus here, although she has faced calls to make far more details public about exactly that in recent days. As for the knock-on effects for Scotland, given the changes in England, Nicola Sturgeon said she was concerned that people may get the wrong message. And she said that people travelling now from England to Scotland for non-essential purposes may be breaking the law. Now, it's just a consequence of devolution, of course, and it's a reality of devolution now, but a striking moment for the UK all the same that we have different freedoms, if you like, in different parts of the country.
Kieran Jenkins in Scotland. Now, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, joins us now from Cardiff. Thanks very much for joining us, First Minister. Is this the end of the four nations working together on this crisis?
Well, I definitely wouldn't say that. My interpretation of things is that right across the United Kingdom, all four governments are broadly doing the same thing. We are all marginally lifting the current lockdown regime. We are all doing it in a careful way, and we are all doing it in the same direction, in the sense that none of us are tightening the rules, all of us are marginally relaxing them. So the big picture is, I still think of a single UK approach, but of course devolution allows us to calibrate that to meet our own individual needs and circumstances.
And it would be fair to say that both you and Ms Sturgeon have been robust in your determination to do it your way.
Well, only because the evidence that we see here in Wales, and I'm sure the First Minister sees in Scotland, tells us that we still have a real circulation of coronavirus. We have very little headroom between the current level of circulation and a resurgence of the virus in a way that could threaten our NHS. So our message in Wales does remain at home as much as you can. Of course, you should stay alert if you're not at home, because the virus is still there, and all the things we're asked to do in terms of social distancing, personal hygiene and so on, all of that remains really important. But our approach will be a careful step-by-step approach, always with public health at the forefront of our thinking.
Right, but then what about the border? Because you neighbour a lot of very populated cities and towns in England. There are quite a lot of people who live in Wales and work in England. What are you going to do with them?
Well, people who live in Wales and work in England, the rules are identical for that on either side of the border. There are a list of businesses that are not allowed to open. That's the same in England and Wales. The main difference is that we have put into the law in Wales that businesses who can open must observe the 2-metre social distancing rule. And that, I think, has given workers in Wales confidence that if they are to return to the workplace, then their safety and their well-being will have been thought about. And you can open as many businesses as you like, but if people who work there don't feel that their health and welfare has been thought about, they're not going to turn up to work. So we have put that into the law in Wales. If you live in Wales and you work in England, you should talk to your employer to make sure that they have put in place the measures which sensible employers, and the vast majority of employers are, of course, responsible, that they have put in place the measures that allow you to go back to work, but allow you to do it safely.
And briefly, what about trippers coming the other way, coming from England into Wales?
Well, my advice to them is don't do it. The law in Wales is that you should only travel locally for exercise, and a trip from Birmingham to Barmouth would not be a local trip. And if you cross the border into Wales, it's the law of Wales that you will be subject to. The Prime Minister has said today to people, don't travel across the border for exercise, and that was good advice.
Right, well now testing. You had 1,314 tests today. England has posted more than 100,000. Now, what's going wrong in Wales?
Well, we have increased the number of tests that we have available, and we are doing more tests. But we test with a purpose. We test key workers and their families. We test patients in hospitals and people in residential care homes. The number of tests is important.
But not very many by the look of it.
The purpose of them.
Not very many.
No, that is, no, I wouldn't accept that. We have a record number of tests available, and over the weekend we were doing more than 2,000 tests a day, which is the most we have ever done. We want to use more of the capacity that we have, but there must be a purpose to testing, not simply the pursuit of an arbitrary number.
Mark Drakeford, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, in the last few minutes, the government has set out new details of the phased reopening of English schools, colleges and nurseries, saying that numbers would stay limited with protective measures in place. That includes keeping children in small groups without mixing with others, staggered breaks and more frequent cleaning. And they've promised access to testing. But many parents and teachers remain concerned. Our Home Affairs correspondent Darshana Soni is live. Darshana, over to you.
Well, there's very interesting detail in that document, Matt. The government has said that the rate of infection is still too high to allow the reopening of schools for all pupils just yet in England. And yet, despite that, they are going ahead with the phased reopening, and they'll be allowing year reception, year 1 and year 6 back to primary schools in June. And that contradiction, according to the unions, has caused huge controversy today. The unions have described the plans as reckless. Now, to try and reassure them, in that document that the government has just released, they've said that they're promising new safety standards for schools. And so, in addition to COVID-secure guidelines for workplaces, they're going to release the same sort of guidelines for schools. And today we've spent the day with one primary school here in Leicester where they've been buying their own PPE. They've been buying things like face masks, visors, temperature control checkers for the children. They say that they're preparing to get their pupils back into school, and although they have concerns, they recognise that some pupils have fallen so far behind that they actually do want them to come back to school if they can do it in a safe manner. This is what they've been telling us today.
Stop that. Here we go. Yeah, that's excellent. Can you go and get away, please?
Is this the new normal? A teacher in a face shield taking the temperature of her pupils to see if they're safe to start the day. At the Northmead Primary in Leicester, they found new ways to look after the dozen or so children of key workers still in school. Now they have 3 weeks to prepare for potentially welcoming back all of reception, year 1 and year 6.
All of our classrooms are really tactile, so you can see typically the children sit in groups on a table. We've got counting activities, but also they'll be doing free flow play activities involving sand, involving water, activities, building gardens in tuff trays and things like that.
So it sounds like a nightmare actually to think about social distancing.
Yeah, I think so. So given that it's really important that the younger children have that chance to be back in school to catch up with their phonics and reading, it's also probably the most challenging year group in terms of socially distancing and in terms of hygiene.
Head teacher Alex Curran says her priority will be the safety of her pupils and her staff, some of whom are shielding due to underlying health conditions.
Do you think some parents will be too scared to bring their kids back?
I think some of them will be scared, but also our school is in a deprived area and our families are really facing some quite a high level of financial difficulty. So we're seeing more and more families becoming vulnerable or struggling. So I think a lot of them will be really, really pleased to have the opportunity to send their children back.
In fact, since the Prime Minister's announcement, the school has already been contacted by parents asking if their children can return because they've been told they have to go back to work.
Now, this corridor is less than 2 metres wide, and the school, like thousands of others, is having to think about how pupils and teachers could use it safely, possibly by introducing a one-way system. In a recent survey, though, 83% of head teachers said that being unable to introduce appropriate social distancing measures would mean that they're unable to open to more pupils.
Teaching unions have warned of schools becoming breeding grounds for the virus and have described the plans to reopen them before test, track and trace policies are in place as reckless.
We've got real concerns if schools reopen too quickly without the virus rate being low enough, it will be another spike. We think that will be dangerous to the teachers and the support staff and the leaders working in schools, and we don't know what danger that will pose to children as well, and to their families when they come home from school.
The government's ambition is for all primary children in England to return before the summer. Secondary school pupils may not get to go back before September, although some heads say the guidance isn't clear enough.
It's got a bit of wire across the bridge of the nose, so you can shape it a bit to get a better fit.
Caroline Robson has been buying PPE for the 3 secondary schools that are in her trust.
We're all in a very difficult zone where medically we really don't know the answers. Neither the government nor us know what is safe or what isn't safe. What we need to do is make sure that we provide the safest possible environment for everybody. But on the other hand, morally we want children to come back in, and we're educationalists and we want to do our job.
The government says its priority is also safety, and there won't be any sanctions for parents who choose not to send their children back in June. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News, Leicester.
So workers in areas like construction and manufacturing in England have been actively encouraged to return to work. Details have been promised over the next few days governing public transport, and firms have been advised now how they must enforce social distancing and hygiene in the workplace. Unions have urged the government to enforce tough safety rules to reassure employees. Our business and global trade correspondent Paul McNamara has this report.
This is a sound the Prime Minister is desperate to hear more of. Industry returning in a tiny corner of the economy after weeks in hibernation. All but one member of staff at this sign makers in Weybridge has been furloughed, and ramping up production again will take time.
We just need to get things going, jobs out the door, on the wall, invoiced, and get the cash coming back in. And realistically, is it going to happen in the next few weeks? I don't know. I don't think so.
Part of the problem for Mark is a lack of clarity and a now less than united policy across the United Kingdom. These signs are destined for a building site in Scotland. In Scotland, though, all but essential building works are still shut. There are many other issues facing Mark, and in short, he wants a complete coronavirus response spelt out.
If the site manager isn't going to allow it or wants other measures put in place, then obviously it's a restriction and it's not going to happen.
So it's out of your hands?
It's totally out of our hands.
Are you worried about that?
Yeah, obviously. It's a case that until the parameters and the guidelines are put in place so that everybody knows full stop and full well what they're doing, then we can't really progress.
The Prime Minister may have decided those who can't work from home should be, quote, actively encouraged to go to work in England. That doesn't mean workplaces are safe, say the unions.
Should they refuse to work?
Workers have that right to refuse to work if they're in imminent danger. But what we want to do is prevent those dangers happening in the first place.
Isn't there a risk that if you keep on putting up hurdles for the government to jump over, there might not be the jobs for your members to return to?
We are absolutely focused on protecting jobs and safety at work, and it's perfectly possible to do both.
Many, of course, have been working all the way through the lockdown period.
I've had a lady where she shut the door, she's on the other side of the door, I'm in the kitchen and she's on the phone to me. So that's what I've had, that sort of thing, and like that's how worried people are, that they're on the phone and they're in the other room because I'm fixing their boiler.
The Prime Minister has said what he wants to see is good, solid British common sense. There are many that agree.
Boris is sort of leaving it up to us a little bit to sort of, if you feel safe to do so, then do it. It's not really hard to understand. Can't understand that, be sensible in what you're doing and stay away, 2 metres apart when you can, and, wear your PPE if you're at work. Then, I'm not sure. What do you want, a full handbook to tell you what to do?
Some people do actually want a handbook.
Well, maybe, I don't know then. I don't know what to say to that.
Tonight they got their handbooks. The government has published 8 of them covering different industries, including factories, offices, shops and take-out restaurants. On face masks and coverings, they state outside of clinical settings and a very few specific jobs, it's, quote, optional and not required by law in the workplace. Nothing published, though, for industries that cannot reopen yet, like much of the hospitality sector, a sector that fears when their guidance comes, many businesses won't be around to read it.
Well, the chair of the Commons Treasury Committee, the Conservative MP Mel Stride, joins me now from central London. Thanks for coming on the programme, Mel Stride. I mean, you heard earlier in the programme, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales are not happy about these baby steps towards easing the lockdown. Do you think it's right in general to end the lockdown or to start ending it when there are hundreds of people still dying every day?
Well, the answer to that has to go back to the scientific evidence, and that is what is at the heart of guiding the government's approach here. Now, you're right that the other 3 parts of the United Kingdom, other than England, have taken a slightly different approach. But of course, these are devolved matters, so they are considerations that they should make, taking into account their local circumstances and their interpretation of the scientific advice that they're receiving.
Right, but we were always told just a few weeks ago that the lockdown could only really be eased once the system of testing and tracing was in place. Now that system, especially the tracing bit of it, is not in place, nowhere close.
Well, I think that's partly why we're seeing a very, very gentle easing. So this is not some kind of free-for-all or flicking a switch and going back to anything like normality. This is about encouraging people where they cannot work from home to go back to work, provided it's safe to do so, slightly flexing the arrangements by which people can go out more often now to exercise and the circumstances of that exercise and so on. But this is not a major move. And I think, as you had heard earlier from the First Minister of Wales, him also confirming that and saying that basically on both sides of the border, this is there are very small moves that are happening here.
Right. So, I mean, as you heard at the beginning of our programme, we said this is a very fine kind of tightrope between saving lives and saving livelihoods. Tough to get right. Do you think the government has got this mix right?
Well, only time will tell. They are very, very fine judgments because, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, for example, even around the health data. So at the moment, the government believes that the reinfection rate, the so-called R number, is somewhere between 0.5 and 0.9. Well, that's quite a wide range to be considering. And of course, there's a lot of unknown out there. They will be weighing up, well, what will the implications on the reinfection rate being if they gradually open schools, if they allow different sectors to engage with the economy, albeit that they'll have social distancing in place. And these are very fine margins and difficult ones to judge. But the answer to your question, Matt, is that there will inevitably, in any of these kind of circumstances, be an inquiry once we're through and out the other side. And those are things that will be then considered with the benefit of hindsight and in considerable detail. But let's just hope that
Indeed,
at the moment,
we're all in uncharted territory. We're trying to feed our way through this crisis. You talk to businesses every day. I mean, when you spoke to them today, are they saying to you that what they're hearing from the government is roughly what they wanted to hear?
Well, I think everyone is welcoming broadly the fact that maybe a little glimmer of light has been shone in the last 24 hours, in that we are very gently moving away from lockdown, but very, very gently. I think where the problem has arisen is that the lack of the kind of phasing, if you like, of the various parts of the announcement here. So the Prime Minister made an announcement to the nation last night on Sunday evening. It wasn't then until 2 o'clock this afternoon that the guidance, general guidance, was released, which then answered a lot of the questions that immediately arose after his comments. And then, of course, is the business guidance that's coming out tonight, and transport guidance tomorrow, and so on. And I think the government needs to get this information out there as quickly as possible, at the same time, really, as making these announcements, so questions are answered as the broad points are landed.
Just one other one, finally. I mean, listening to Boris Johnson, the tone from him seems to be, it's now over to you. You know, it's your responsibility to decide what you're going to do with these directions. Is he basically putting the onus of responsibility on us, and is that the right thing to do?
Well, I think there is inevitably a responsibility on each and every one of us to not only look after our own health, but also do the right thing such that we don't infect other people and put undue stress on those brave people in the front line who are working so hard in the National Health Service.
But is he saying don't blame us if it goes wrong?
Sorry.
Is he saying don't blame us if it goes wrong?
Oh, no, certainly not. Ultimately, it is the government's responsibility to decide on the easing of measures, to monitor the various infection rates that are occurring and to react accordingly. But each and every one of us has an individual responsibility now to behave responsibly and just stick to the guidelines that there are, as indeed the bulk of the population has been to date, extremely successfully, actually.